Hello, I'm Tony Kaye. Welcome to Property Point again. I'm joined by Nerida Consibee from REA Group. Hi, Nerida.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Nerida, just wanted to talk about what's happening with clearance rates in the market. We've seen some tailing off in Sydney, I think over several weeks now. Melbourne seems to be holding above 70%. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a very different spring we're in compared to last year. I mean, it's not surprising that things have calmed down quite a lot. If you have a look at last year, we had those two interest rate cuts during the year, and that really led to this huge amount of demand. We saw it on site moving into the spring months. This year, we're starting to see many banks increase rates, and as a result, activity is becoming more moderated. But it's good news. I mean, I don't think the market's not heading to a crash. I mean, we're certainly not seeing that, but it's slowing down. It means it's going to be easier for buyers, but also upgraders as well. So we'll hopefully continue to see an increase in stock on the market.
So is it just a case really that the market's sort of coming back to some level of normality?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing else to suggest that the market is crashing, and we'd need a very significant trigger for things to really go wrong, and usually that trigger is rising unemployment. At the moment, certainly Melbourne, Sydney, still seeing employment growth, but the market is coming back, so those affordability concerns may be reduced a little bit in both those cities.
Yeah, we haven't really got those trigger points, and we've been talking about it for quite a long time. To see a major market correction, it'd have to be, a whole combination of factors to cause that, rather than, just one or two sort of minor things aren't likely to trigger a crash.
Yeah, I mean, we saw a crash in Perth. I mean, it wasn't a dire crash, but prices came off a lot, and it was just employment that did it. That, during that mining boom, we just had so much employment growth, we had so much population growth, and there was a lot of pressure on prices. But as soon as that stopped, all those people had to find jobs, and a lot of them came to Sydney and Melbourne, and now both those cities are under pressure. And it's not purely population growth, it's jobs growth that's driving it, but that's really putting the pressure on prices.
So let's go around the houses, so to speak. Starting in Sydney, what's happening up there?
Yeah, I mean, Sydney apartment demand has come right off, and I think a lot of it has to do with investors finding it quite difficult now to get finance. Housing demand still remains fairly solid, but again, that took a bit of a cut. If we move to Canberra, a very similar situation to what's happening in Sydney. It's apartment demand seems to be coming off, houses a little bit less impacted.
Victoria or Melbourne?
Yeah, Melbourne is really our strongest city in Australia. We're continuing to see strong price growth. I mean, not as strong as last year, but price growth is holding up. Clearance rates are still high. We're still seeing jobs growth, and that's going to keep prices rising for a bit longer in that city.
Adelaide?
Adelaide is pretty soft. There was, it's interesting having a look at offshore buyers, people searching in Adelaide from offshore. We saw a really big drop off, and I think that's a lot to do with taxation that was introduced in that state to foreign buyers. So that'll impact apartments. But quite a similar situation to the rest of the country, that we're starting to see a little bit of a moderation in demand on site.
Well, but we may as well keep moving around, so we'll head to Perth now.
Yeah, so Perth has been interesting. So Perth is obviously one of our weakest markets in Australia for quite some time. We're starting to see an increase in demand. So Perth and Darwin were the only two cities where we saw sustained increase in buyer demand over the past couple of months. So I think things are turning around there. I don't think it'll be a rapid rise in either of those cities, but things do seem to be turning around in both Perth and Darwin.
Yeah, in Perth there's been, I suppose, some sort of a overflow from mining. Obviously the mining boom has ended, but there's been quite a rally in other areas of the mining sector, so perhaps that's starting to flow through there. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, if you have a look in any city, as soon as jobs growth happens, that's when we start to see prices start to increase, and that's obviously the biggest driver in Perth at the moment.
Yep, and I think we covered Queensland.
Brisbane. So Brisbane is, apartment demand actually hasn't been too bad in Brisbane. I mean, it is a city that is fairly widely acknowledged that it's experiencing quite a bit of oversupply. But apartment demand does seem to be picking up. I think, there may be a few bargain hunters out there looking at Brisbane to see if there's anything that they can pick up. Foreign buyer activity is also up in Brisbane. So while Sydney and Adelaide we saw a drop off in foreign buyer activity, we're starting to see more of a pickup in Brisbane. Also Melbourne continuing to grow, but Brisbane also is growing. So, I think those apartments will be absorbed. I mean, certainly the pipeline of new development isn't quite as or isn't as strong as it has been, but yeah, demand is certainly there in Brisbane.
And last but not least, we'll head down to Tasmania.
Yeah, so Tasmania continues to be really hot on our site, and it continues to see the strongest rental demand. It continues to see the strongest buyer demand. It's a small market, so it's obviously influenced more easily by a little bit of employment growth, but certainly Hobart at the moment is just seeing such strong demand, and it's interesting. It's not just buyer demand, because I thought it was speculative behaviour when I started to see that activity, but rental demand seems to be up as well.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. And up the other end of Tasmania, though, I suppose it's still fairly weak.
Yeah, and I think that, like any market, you do need to be careful and make sure you understand the market, because although inner Hobart is doing amazing, we're certainly not seeing anywhere near the levels of activity in, say, Launceston. So it really does depend where you are.
Oh, thanks, Nerida. We'll leave it there.
Thanks for having me.
Join us again on Property Point next time.